All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. Last week when we read chapter 5, there was a little... Oh, do you know what the word hiccup means? Hiccup is when you have this problem. That's a hiccup. And sometimes you can use that to mean that there was a little problem. You have a little problem. So I can tell you that last week we had a little hiccup with the reading of chapter 5 because I took a little break and I forgot to turn my microphone back on when I came back. So today we are going to reread chapter 5, but also we'll read chapter 6. So we have a double whammy today. We're reading 2 chapters. If this is your first time watching, we're not just reading the words, we're stopping and talking about interesting vocabulary words that we find along the way. So if you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you to ask questions as we go, and I will stop and explain any phrases or words that you don't understand. If you don't ask me to stop, then I probably will just stop sometimes and explain words that I think maybe you don't know, or phrases I think maybe you don't understand. But definitely, if you're watching this, then I encourage you to ask questions. Sorry, I'm just adjusting the volume of the background music. It's a little too loud. Okay. So let's get started again with chapter 5, and then we'll do chapter 6 of Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. All right. When I came home to West Egg that night, I was afraid for a moment that my house was on fire. 2 o'clock, and the whole of the peninsula was blazing with light, which fell unreal on the shrubbery and made the elongated glints upon the roadside wires. Glinting is like the reflection of light. So he's coming home, and it looks like the property is on fire. There's so much light coming from the property, it looks like it's on fire. And then he's describing the fire. Blaze is a word that you always hear with associated with fire. A blaze is a very strong fire. Actually, let's look up the definition of blaze. But to me, I associate that with a very strong fire. All right, so when something is burning brightly, so you have the fire, but it's also making a lot of light. That's a blaze. So if the whole property was blazing, it seems like there was a big fire and it was producing a lot of light. And we've got Fari Bors here. Fari Bors says, what is elongate? Well, long, you know the word long, of course, which means long. And elongate means to make something longer. That's a verb, and it means to make something longer. So how did they use elongate here? I was afraid my house was on fire. 2 o'clock, and the whole corner of the peninsula was blazing with light, which fell unreal on the shrubbery and made thin, elongating glints upon the roadside wires. So imagine the telephone wires or the electrical wires that follow the road. If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you probably would not see those. Definitely you would not see those at 2 o'clock in the morning. But because of all of the light coming from the property, you could see like a long line of fire going across the road. Elongating, making it longer, making it seem longer, making it look longer, showing you a lot of length, something like that. Fari Bors says, what have you been, by the way? Do you mean how have I been, or what have I been doing? No, I've been meaning to make more videos recently. I'm afraid I've been a little bit lazy. But I think starting today, I'm going to make more videos. I just sometimes have to find the energy. All right, so let's start that paragraph again, remembering the words elongate and blaze. When I came home to West Egg that night, I was afraid for a moment that my house was on fire. 2:00, and the whole corner of the peninsula was blazing with light, which fell unreal on the shrubbery and made thin, elongating glints upon the roadside wires. Turning a corner, I saw that it was Gatsby's house, lit from tower to cellar. Miriam says hello. Hi, Miriam. How are you doing today? Thanks for joining us. Faribor says, I'm a little groggy. Sorry. It's 5:30. Yes. Here at 6:30. You're up very early. You must be a morning person. Okay, let's see. But there wasn't a sound. Oh, wait. I think I skipped something. At first, I thought it was another party, a wild rout that had resolved itself into hide-and-go-seek, or sardines in the box, which all the house thrown open to the game. But there wasn't a sound. Only wind in the trees, which blew the wires and made the lights go off, and again, as if the house had winked into the darkness. As my taxi cab groaned away, groaning is, that's groaning. So his taxi cab is groaning. It's making sounds like that. As my taxi groaned away, I saw Gatsby walking toward me across his lawn. Your place looks like the World's Fair, I said. Does it? He turned his eyes towards it absently. I've been glancing into some of the rooms. Let's go to Coney Island, old sport, in my car. It's too late. Well, suppose we take a plunge in the pool. I haven't made use of it all summer. I've got to go to bed. All right. He waited, looking at me with a suppressed eagerness. So eager means you're ready to do something, and suppressed means you're holding it back. So he's looking at Nick, waiting for him to do something or say something. He's expecting something to come, but he's trying not to show it. I talked to Miss Baker, I said, for a moment. I'm going to call up Daisy tomorrow and invite her to tea. Oh, that's all right, he said carelessly. I don't want to put you through any trouble. What day would suit you? What day would suit you? He corrected me quickly. I don't want to put you to any trouble, you see. How about the day after tomorrow? He considered it for a moment, and then, with reluctance, I want to get the grass cut. We both looked at the grass. There was a sharp line where my ragged lawn ended and the darker, well-kept expanse of his began, and I suspected he meant my grass. There's another little thing, he said, uncertainly, and hesitated. Would you rather put it off a few days? So I remember last week when we read chapter 5, I mentioned this phrasal verb because it's a very useful and important phrasal verb. To put something off is to delay it, to make it go later than it's supposed to. So if you put off an appointment, you're delaying it. If your doctor's appointment is on Thursday, and you decide you want to wait until Saturday, you are putting your appointment off. So putting something off is to make something go later, to delay something. Would you rather put it off for a few days? So he's asking, do you want... you can meet Daisy in a few days if you want, but if you prefer, we can put it off for a few days. We can delay it. We can make it Saturday or Sunday or Monday. Oh, it isn't about that. At least, he fumbled with a series of beginnings. Why, look here, old sport. You don't make much money, do you? Not very much. This seemed to reassure him as he continued more confidently. I thought you didn't. If you'll pardon my... You see, I carry on a little business on the side. A sort of sideline, you understand. And I thought that if you don't make very much, you're selling bonds, aren't you, old sport? Trying to? Well, this would interest you. It wouldn't take up much of your time, and you might pick up a nice bit of money if it happens to be a rather confidential sort of thing. And confidential means keep it secret, don't tell anyone. I realize now that under different circumstances, that conversation might have been one of the crises of my life. But because the other was obviously and tactlessly for service to be rendered, I had no choice except to cut him off there. And cut off is another phrasal verb which means interrupt, to interrupt him. So I thought I would cut him off. I thought I would interrupt him. I've got my hands full, I said. I'm much obliged, but I couldn't take on any more work. Oh, you wouldn't have to do any business with Wolsheim. Evidently, he thought that I was shying away. Shying away is like trying to avoid something, moving a little bit back to avoid something. He thought I was shying away from the connection mentioned at lunch, but I assured him he was wrong. He waited a moment longer, hoping I'd begin a conversation, but I was too absorbed to be responsive, so he went unwillingly home. The evening made me lightheaded and happy. I think I walked into a deep sleep and entered my front door. Faribor says, connection? What's that? In a previous chapter, I don't know if you were here when we did that chapter, he met a business associate of Gatsby. They all had lunch together in New York. And Wolsheim is a Jewish person, and so he's just saying the word connection, but with sort of a New York Jewish accent. So he's saying connection instead of connection. The evening had made me lightheaded and happy. I think I walked into a deep, deep sleep as I entered my front door. So I didn't know whether or not Gatsby went to Coney Island, or for how many hours he'd glanced into rooms while his house blazed gaudily on. I called up Daisy from the office the next morning and invited her to come to tea. Don't bring Tom, I warned her. What? Who's Tom? She asked, innocently. The day agreed upon was pouring rain. At 11 o'clock, a man in a raincoat, dragging a lawnmower, tapped on my front door and said that Mr. Gatsby had sent him over to cut my grass. This reminded me that I had forgotten to tell my Finn to come back, so I drove into West Egg to search for her among the soggy whitewashed alleys, and to buy some cups and lemons and flowers. Gaudy means we talked about this word before, and I'm sure I looked up the definition before, but gaudy is something that is very attention-getting. Let's see. Extravagant, bright, showy, typical, so as to be tasteless. Let's take a look at some pictures of gaudy. So gaudy is when something is very colorful or something is very noticeable, but in a bad way. And sometimes people like it, So these people, they probably like the way that the clothes that they're wearing, the dress that they're wearing. But some people would think it's unattractive because there's too much happening. too many colors, too many designs. So this would be something that's gaudy. This car, some people would love to have this car, but some people would think, oh, that's very ugly. It's too the red is too red and there's too much gold, and they would say it's gaudy. Let's see if we can find some people. It's become a fashion that people like to make their fingernails very. Oh no. I'm having trouble with my mouse. A lot of different colors. Right? Have you seen that? A lot of people, look at this. This is gaudy jewelry, okay? It's too big. It's too bright. There are too many colors, too many things happening. Here are some gaudy, I'm going to get in trouble because some people really like to paint their fingernails like this. But a lot of people would say these are very gaudy fingernails. It's too many colors, too many things happening. So some people love gaudy and some people hate it. That's kind of a cool word, gaudy. All right, how did they use it here? Let's see how they used it. So Gatsby went to, I don't know if Gatsby went to Coney Island, or for how long, or for how many hours he glanced into rooms while his house blazed gaudily on. So remember, the chapter opens with it's 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's extremely bright near Gatsby's house because all of the lights are on. And, you know, this is something that would attract a lot of attention, and maybe it seems like too much. So that's why he's saying that the lights blazed gaudily on. Remember, blaze is like a fire giving off a lot of light. So it was kind of in bad taste to have all of these lights on at 2 o'clock in the morning. The flowers were unnecessary, for at 2 o'clock a greenhouse arrived from Gatsby's, with innumerable receptacles to contain it. An hour later, the front door opened nervously, and Gatsby, in a white flannel suit, silver shirt, and gold-colored tie, hurried in. See, that sounds pretty gaudy, if you ask me. So he's wearing a white jacket and white pants. He's wearing a shirt which is silver-colored, and a gold-colored tie. To me, that sounds gaudy. But some people will find that very attractive. And they won't think it's gaudy. He was pale, and there were dark signs of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately. "Well, the grass looks fine, if that's what you mean." "What grass?" he inquired blankly. "Oh, the grass in the yard." He looked out the window at it, but judging from his expression, I don't believe he saw a thing. "Looks very good," he remarked vaguely. One of the papers said they thought the rain would stop at about 4. I think it was the Journal. "Have you got everything you need in the shape of tea?" I took him to the pantry. A pantry, that's where you store food in a kitchen. So a lot of times in a kitchen there'll be a little room or a little closet where you put all of the dry things like flour or maybe canned things or drinks or something like that. That's called a pantry. I took him into the pantry where he looked a little reproachfully at Finn. So when you reproach something, you disapprove of it. So he's got an old cleaning lady who's Finnish. She's from Finland, so he calls her the Finn. And when Gatsby saw her, he looked reproachfully at her, disapproving, like, because probably he's a very rich man, so he probably has servants who wear beautiful uniforms and probably are very attractive looking. And so when he sees this old lady probably not wearing very nice clothes, I don't want her serving us tea. I took him to the pantry, where he looked a little reproachfully at the Finn. Together, we scrutinized the 12 lemon cakes and from the delicatessen shop. To scrutinize something is to look at it very closely, to try to find problems. So they were looking at the cakes he bought from the bakery. Are these okay? I guess these are okay. This is scrutinizing something. Will they do? I asked. Of course, they're fine, he added hollowly, old sport. The rain cooled about 3:30 to a damp mist, through which occasional thin drops swam like dew. Gatsby looked with vacant eyes through a copy of Clay's Economics. Starting at the finished tread. We've seen that word so many times. I had no idea what a common word that is, to start. This does not mean to begin. This means to be surprised. So when the Finn walks into the room, Gatsby's looking at a book, reading a book, and then the Finn comes into the room and he gets surprised. He starts. That's what it means here. Starting at the Finn. Gatsby looked with vacant eyes through a copy of Clay's Economics. Starting at the finished tread. Tread is walking. Boom, 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 boom. Walking that shook the kitchen floor. So she must be fat if her tread is shaking the kitchen floor. And peering toward the bleared windows where from time to time, as if a series of invisible but alarming happenings were taking place outside. Finally, he got up and informed me in uncertain voice that he was going home. Why is that? Nobody's coming to tea. It's too late. He looked at his watch, as if there was some pressing demand on his time elsewhere. I can't wait all day. Miriam is asking about to Blair. Where was that? Isn't that funny how I can read like a paragraph and I don't remember any of the words that I just read? Let's see. Starting at the finished tread and shook the kitchen floor and peering down the bleared windows. Yeah, I'm not really sure how they're using that word. Let's take a look. To Blair. I mean, I've heard about music blaring. That's, I think, when you would use the word music blaring, it means it's very loud, but I'm not even sure if that's the same word. Let's see. To blare, to make dim or blurry, to dim. Yeah, okay, so from I think that this must be from the same word as the word blurry. That makes sense, doesn't it? That the word blurry means it's difficult to see exact shapes, exact things. Nothing is clear when something is blurry. And when I look up blare on Google, it says it's an archaic word. Archaic means people don't use it anymore. And as a verb, it means making something blurry, making something unclear. So if you imagine looking outside of a window where it's been raining and there's a lot of moisture, it would be very difficult to see what's on the other side. Maybe you can just see very inexact shapes and very unclear colors. And so I think that's what is meant here. Wait, let's read it again. I'm pretty sure that's what it means here. And I think Blair, the other Blair that I was talking about, like Blair music, is B-L-A-R-E. Let's see. Yeah, so if it's B-L-A-R-E, that means very loud music. The music was blaring. So this is a different Blair. All right, let's read that again. Where did it say? The finished tread that shook the kitchen floor, and peering toward the bleared windows, from time to time, as if a series of invisible but alarming happenings. So yes, he's looking out the window, but you can't really see what's happening exactly outside of the window. Faribor says, sorry for the interruption. Are you visualize what you read all the time? Do you mean, do I have a picture in my head of what I'm reading? I do, yes. What about you? Do you? Are you trying to visualize it also? To visualize means to create a picture in your head while you're reading. Yes, I visualize it. Do you? Let's see. I lost my place. But you know what? I think I have to take a 1-minute break. But this time, I'm not touching the mute button because I'll forget to turn it back on, and then we'll have problems. But give me 1 minute. I'll be right back. Uh-oh, now I'm blurry. I'm blaring. Now let me fix this. Did I fix it? Yes. Okay. I'm no longer blaring. All right, but that's an archaic word, so people don't use it anymore. Nobody's coming to tea. It's too late. He looked at his watch, as if there was some pressing demand on his time elsewhere. I can't wait all day. Don't be silly. It's just 2 minutes to 4. He sat down, miserably, as if I had pushed him, and simultaneously there was a sound of a motor turning into my lane. We both jumped up, and a little harrowed myself, I went into the yard. Under the dripping bare lilac trees, a large open car was coming up the drive. It stopped. Daisy's face, tipped sideways beneath a 3-corner lavender hat, looked out at me with a bright, ecstatic smile. Ecstatic means extremely happy. Is this absolutely where you live, my dearest one? The exhilarating ripple of her voice was a wild tonic in the rain. I had to follow the sound of it for a moment, up and down, with my ear alone before any words came through. A damp streak of hair lay like a dash of blue paint across her cheek. I remember the last time we read this last week, we talked about the word streak. Somebody asked about the word streak. And a streak is like a line. Let's look at some pictures of streaks. We should have looked at streak last time, but I don't think that we did. Let's see, streaks. Or maybe streaking. I'm just trying to find pictures of a streak. I forgot that streaking means something stupid also. No, there are no good pictures of streaks, but imagine if you're washing a mirror or glass. If you don't wash it carefully, you'll leave little lines in the glass, little marks on the glass, and those are called streaks. Wash it well, or you'll leave streaks. But streak is just a line. It's like a very uneven looking line. Sometimes thick, sometimes thin. Those are streaks. Fari Boris is saying in bowling, maybe I think when you're talking about bowling, you're talking about strike. Strike means Strike means no good. That's a strike. A streak is a line. A streak is always some kind of line. So if you're playing a game, you could have a winning streak, a winning line, meaning you never lose. You've won 1 game, 2 games, 3 games, 4 games, 5 games. This is a winning streak. Miriam says streak, strap. Strap is also a line, but a strap is a line of material, usually some kind of material to either hold something, like if you have a purse or a bag. This is the strap, which, yes, it's a long line, but streak, I don't think a streak is ever physical. I can't think of when a streak could be physical. But they're both lines, different kinds of lines. A damp streak of hair lay like a dash of blue paint across her cheek, and her hand was wet with glistening drops as I took it to help her from the car. "Are you in love with me?" she said, low in my ear, "or why did I have to come alone? That's the secret of Castle Rack Rent. Tell your chauffeur to go away and spend an hour. Come back in an hour, Ferdy." Then in a grave murmur, "His name is Ferdy." Does the gasoline affect his noise? Does the gasoline affect his nose? "I don't think so," she said innocently. "Why?" We went in. To my overwhelming surprise, the living room was deserted. If something is deserted, that means that all the people have left. So if the room is deserted, that means there are no people. No Finnish cleaning lady, no Gatsby, no people. We went in, and to my overwhelming surprise, the living room was deserted. "Well, that's funny," I exclaimed. That word funny can mean 2 different things. Sometimes it means ha 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 ha, and sometimes it means strange. It just depends on the context. Here, it obviously means strange. Well, that's strange. That's odd. That's funny. It's a very common thing to use funny as strange. And sometimes people will ask for clarification. They'll say funny, ha-ha. I mean, which funny do you mean? Do you mean funny it makes you laugh, or funny strange? "What's funny?" She turned her head as there was a light, dignified, knocking at the door. I went and opened it. Gatsby, pale as death, with his hands plunged like weights in his coat pockets, was standing in a puddle of water, glaring tragically into my eyes. With his hands still in his coat pockets, he stalked by me into the hall, turned sharply, as if he were on a wire, and disappeared into the living room. It wasn't a bit funny. So here's funny again, but this time using funny in the sense of ha-ha. It wasn't ha-ha. Aware of the loud beating of my own heart, I pulled the door against the increasing rain. For half a minute there wasn't a sound, and then from the living room I heard a sort of choking murmur, part of a laugh followed by Daisy's voice on a clear artificial note. We keep seeing this word murmur, and I know I've talked about it before, But murmuring is like talking, but you can't really understand the words. So maybe if you hear some people far away, you can hear that they're talking, but you can't really hear the words. That would be murmuring. Or sometimes if people are very close to you, but they're having difficulty saying particular words, they might talk a little bit like this, and this is murmuring. That's what murmuring is. I certainly am awfully glad to see you again. A pause. It endured horribly. I had nothing to do in the hall, so I went into the room. Gatsby, his hands still in his pockets, was reclining against the mantelpiece in a strained counterfeit of perfect ease. So I remember talking about this last week. First we have reclining. Reclining means going back. This is reclining. I'm reclining. So if you have a chair, it's like I'm reliving last week because I remember doing this. So if you have a chair that has this capability of going back, this is called a recliner. This is reclining, going back, moving backwards like this. Reclining. Faribor says, oh, I have a recliner in my house. Did you know that it was a recliner? Did you know that that's what it was called? All right, let's see. Gatsby, his hands still in his pockets, was reclining against the mantelpiece, so against the fireplace. And in a strained counterfeit of perfect ease. So I remember also talking about the word counterfeit last week. Somebody said, what does that mean? That means fake, not authentic. So he's trying to look comfortable. He's trying to look cool. But it's obviously he's not. It's very obvious that it's strained, it's forced. It doesn't look authentic. His head leaned back so far that it rested against the face of a defunct mantelpiece clock. Defunct means doesn't work anymore. So there's an old clock sitting on above the fireplace on the mantelpiece, the little shelf above the fireplace. And so there's a nice clock. Maybe it looks very nice, but it doesn't work. So it just sits there, and his head moved up against it. And from this position, his distraught eyes stared down at Daisy, who was sitting frightened, but graceful, on the edge of a stiff chair. We met before, muttered Gatsby. His eyes glanced momentarily at me, and his lips parted with an abortive attempt at a laugh. Very uneasy, uncomfortable laugh. Luckily, the clock took this moment to tilt dangerously at the pressure of his head, whereupon he turned and caught it with trembling fingers and set it back into place. So he's leaning back, and his head hits the clock, and the clock almost falls over, and he catches it and puts it back in the correct place. And then he sat down rigidly, his elbow on the arm of a sofa, and his chin on his hand. I'm sorry about the clock, he said. My own face had now assumed a deep tropical burn. I couldn't muster up a single commonplace out of the 1,000 in my head. To muster something is to bring something together, to find and bring together. So if you muster, what was he mustering here? He's trying to muster up words. He couldn't find the words. He couldn't bring the words together inside of his head. I couldn't muster up the words. If you have to do something and you're afraid, then you will have to find the courage from inside of your body. You will have to muster the courage to do something. That's mustering. It's an old clock, I told them idiotically. I think we all believed for a moment that it had smashed into pieces on the floor. We haven't met for many years, said Daisy, her voice as matter of fact as it could ever be. 5 years, next November. The automatic quality of Gatsby's answer set us all back at least another minute. I had them both on their feet, with the desperate suggestion. I had them both on their feet, with the desperate suggestion that they help me make tea in the kitchen, when the demoniac Finn brought it on a tray. So I remember looking at this last time. So this is a very awkward moment in the parlor or the living room or wherever they are. And suddenly Nick gets an idea to break the ice, to change the moment into something more comfortable. He thinks, oh, we can all go in the kitchen and make tea together, and this will make things less awkward, less strange, less funny. And so just when he gets this wonderful idea, the Finnish lady brings in tea, and he thinks, oh, she just ruined everything. So he says the demoniac Finn. Demoniac is not a word that I think people use anymore. I remember looking it up last time, and it means demonic. Evil. So the evil Finn ruined his plans. That's why he's calling her evil. She doesn't know what she did. Amid the welcome confusion of cups and cakes, and certain physical decency established itself. Gatsby got himself into a shadow, while Daisy and I looked conscientiously from one another to the other of us with tense, unhappy eyes. However, a calmness wasn't an end in itself if I made an excuse at the first possible moment and got to my feet. "Where are you going?" demanded Gatsby in immediate alarm. "I'll be back." "I've got to speak to you about something before you go." He followed me wildly into the kitchen, closed the door, and whispered, "Oh, God," in a miserable way. "What's the matter?" "This is a terrible mistake," he said, shaking his head from side to side. "A terrible, terrible mistake." "You're just embarrassed, that's all. And luckily," I added, "Daisy's embarrassed too." "She's embarrassed?" he repeated, incredulously. Remember that word credo means believe. So when you say incredible, that really means unbelievable. So incredulous means I don't believe it. So when somebody does something in an incredulous way, it means they do it in a way that shows they don't believe it. "She's embarrassed? I don't believe it." "She's embarrassed?" he said incredulously. "Just as much as you are." Don't talk so loud." "You're acting like a little boy," I broke out impatiently. "Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy's sitting in there all alone." He raised his hand to stop my words, looked at me with unforgettable reproach, and opening the door, cautiously went back into the other room. I walked out the back way, just as Gatsby had, when he had made his nervous circuit of the house half an hour before. Anne is asking about broke out. Where was that? Broke out. Broke out impatiently. So let's see. "You're acting like a little boy," I broke out impatiently. Usually the way that you would use the word break out means like escape. So if the prisoner escapes from the jail, you say the prisoner broke out from the jail. If you're talking about a pandemic, you can say the pandemic broke out in the city. So, it went from one or two people to everywhere. It escaped. They tried to keep it from escaping, but it escaped. So actually, break out is an extremely common phrasal verb. Think about this situation where Gatsby and Nick are having this very strange conversation in the kitchen, and Nick does not approve of Gatsby's behavior. Gatsby's acting like a little boy. But that's not something that you say to another person. That isn't very nice. So it's just something that you think in your head. But these words escaped from his mouth. And so he broke out with those words. Those words escaped from his mouth. Does that make sense? Is that pretty clear what that means? How breakout is being used here? You're acting like a little boy. That's something you don't tell another person, another adult. You're acting like a little boy. I broke out impatiently. It just came out. He couldn't stop it. It escaped. Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy's sitting in there all alone. He raised his hand to stop my words, looked at me with unforgettable reproach. Remember, reproach means I don't approve. And opening the door, cautiously went back into the other room. I walked out the back way, just as Gatsby had when he had made his nervous circuit of the house half an hour before, and ran for a huge, black, knotted tree, whose massed leaves made a fabric against the rain. Once more, it was Gatsby's pouring and my irregular lawn. Once more, it was pouring, and my irregular lawn, well shaved by Gatsby's gardener, abounded in small, muddy swamps and prehistoric marshes. And I remember last time somebody asked me, what does that mean, abounded? If something abounds, it means it's everywhere. So, in the big city, crime abounds. That means in the big city, there's crime everywhere. Or at the party, happy people abounded. That's kind of a funny way of talking. You really wouldn't say that, but you could, and that means there were happy people everywhere at the party. So that's what abound means. And here, the lawn of Nick's property must be very uneven. So when it rains, there are little puddles like a little small lake, little puddles everywhere because of the rain. So marshes and swamps abounded on his property. They were everywhere. There was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gatsby's enormous house, so I stared at it, like Kant at his church steeple, for half an hour. A brewer had built it early in the period craze, a decade before, and there was a story that he'd agreed to pay 5 years' taxes on all the neighboring cottages if the owners would have their roofs thatched with straw. Perhaps their refusal took the heart out of his plan to found a family, and he went into an immediate decline. His children sold his house with the black wreath still on the door. Anne is asking about steeple and craze. Okay, steeple is the part of a church like this. Wait, how did that go? Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the door and see all the little people. I don't know. That's something kids do. Here's the church. I don't remember how it begins. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the door and see all the little people. So steeple is just the pointed part of a church. And craze is a noun. You have crazy, which is an adjective. He's crazy. That place is crazy. These people are crazy. That's an adjective describing something. And a craze is a period of time where people are acting crazy. Sometimes you could use craze to mean like the latest fashion. I could say, what is the latest craze? And I have no idea because I'm old and I don't care. But that means, what is the latest fashion? What is everyone talking about? Oh, I remember. Do you remember like 10 years back? Something like that. Maybe longer now. Do you remember these things? Everybody seemed to have these, like, I don't know, 10 years ago. These are called fidget spinners. And I think like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, everybody had these. And so you could say that 10 years ago, fidget spinners were a big craze. People were going crazy for them. Everybody had them. Yeah, but now you don't see them. It was just a period of time for maybe 5 or 10 years everybody was using one of these. And so that's why you call it a craze, because it's like a period of time where everybody went crazy for it, and now it's finished. Does that make sense? So you could use craze to mean a period of time where everybody was going crazy for something. So a brewer had built it early in the period craze. So the period craze, I don't know what that refers to, but it seems to be around 1910. Oh, I do know what it means. Period could refer to, as you know, it could refer to a time. And so this person, this brewer who built Gatsby's house, built it 10 years ago to make it look like a certain period. And that's true because let me show you something here. So when this man built the house, he was not trying to make it look like a modern house. He was trying to make it look like an old traditional house. And he even tried to pay the people in the neighborhood to change the roof of their house, to thatch their roofs. Thatching means instead of like a solid roof, you have this grass on top of your roof. So this very rich man, he was trying to make the whole area look like a certain period, maybe 200 or 300 or 400 years ago. So that was the period craze. So maybe in the 1910s, all people in the US were going crazy for trying to make everything look very traditional. And so he's explaining that when this man, this very rich man, built this house, he tried to pay the people in the neighborhood to do this to their house to make it look like a special period. He was going crazy for that idea. And they all said no. And when they said no, we're not thatching our roofs. Are you crazy? He lost his spirit and he kind of abandoned the house and he died there. So his heart was broken that the people wouldn't listen to him and thatch their roofs. Let's read that again. So there was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gatsby's enormous house. I stared at it like Kant at his church steeple. So Kant was a German philosopher in I think the 18th century, and I don't know what they're referring to, but he's saying, I stared at the house in the same way that Kant stared at the church steeple. I don't know. I don't know what that's a reference to. For half an hour, a brewer had built it early in the period craze, a decade before. So in the 1910s or the 1900s, the aughts, there was a craze. Many people wanted towns and houses to look very authentically old, like 400 years old or 500 years old. They wanted their whole town to look that way. And so this man, that's the period craze. And this man tried to pay the villagers to thatch their roofs of their houses to make it look more authentic. And they said, "What are you talking about? Get out of here. We're not doing that." And there was a story that he'd agreed to pay 5 years' taxes on all neighboring cottages if the owners would have thatched their roofs, would have their roofs thatched with straw. Straw is the grass that you use for thatching. Perhaps the refusal took the heart out of his plan to found a family. He went into an immediate decline. His children sold his house with the black wreath still on the door. Americans, while occasionally willing to be serfs, have always been obstinate about being peasantry. After half an hour, the sun shone again, and the grocer's automobile rounded Gatsby's drive, with the raw material for his servant's dinner. I felt sure he wouldn't eat a spoonful. A maid began opening the upper windows of his house, and appeared momentarily in each, and leaning from a large central bay, spat. That's spitting. Spit. That's spitting. Spit, spat, spat. Spat into the garden. It was time I went back, and while the rain continued, it had seemed like the murmur of their voices, rising and swelling a little now and then, with gusts of emotion. Gust is like the movement, the strong movement of air. So a gust of wind. Whoosh, that's like a gust of wind. This is a gust of emotion. Whoosh. So you walk into the room and you're hit by the emotion like the wind. But in the new silence, I felt that silence had fallen within the house, too. I went in, after making every possible noise in the kitchen. Faribor says gust like gusto. No, gusto is a Latin word which means to be pleased or to enjoy something or to like something. So if you do something with gusto, that means you do it with enjoyment, with all of your heart. And I don't think that those are related words. I think that's just a coincidence. So gusto means pleasure or happiness. And gust means a big explosion of air or emotion. But now that you're asking that, now I'm curious and I want to know if somehow they're related. But if anything, I think the word gust, which I think is a Germanic word, is probably related to the word ghost. But let's see. Gust, sudden squall of wind, Old Norse, guster. Kind of means like flood or energy or it's not related though. It's not related to gusto for sure. Okay. I went in after making every possible noise in the kitchen short of pushing over the stove. But I don't believe they heard a sound. They were sitting at either end of the couch, looking at each other as if some question had been asked or was in the air, and every vestige of embarrassment was gone. Daisy's face was smeared with tears, and when I came in, she jumped up and began wiping at it with her handkerchief before a mirror. There was a change in Gatsby that was simply confounding. Confounding means confusing. He literally glowed. Without a word or a gesture of exultation, a new well-being radiated and filled the little room. "Oh, hello, old sport," he said, as if he hadn't seen me for years. I thought for a moment he was going to shake hands. "It stopped raining." "Has it?" When he realized what I was talking about, that there were twinkle bells of sunshine in the room, he smiled like a weatherman, like an ecstatic patron of recurrent light, and repeated the news to Daisy. "What do you think of that? It stopped raining." "I'm glad, Jay." Her throat, full of aching, grieving beauty, told only of her unexpected joy. "You're sure you want me to come?" "Absolutely, old sport." Oh wait, I skipped a line, sorry. "I want you and Daisy to come over to my house," he said. "I'd like to show her around." "You're sure you want me to come?" "Absolutely, old sport." Daisy went upstairs to wash her face. Too late, I thought, with humiliation of my towels, while Gatsby and I waited on the lawn. "My gas looks well. My house looks well, doesn't it?" he demanded. "See how the whole front of it catches the light?" I agreed that it was splendid. Yes, his eyes went over it, every arched door and square tower. "It took me just 3 years to earn the money that bought it." "I thought you inherited your money." "Oh, I did, old sport," he said automatically. "But I lost most of it in the big panic, the panic of the war." I think he hardly knew what he was saying, for when I asked him what business he was in, he answered, "That's my affair," before he realized that it wasn't the appropriate reply. "Oh, I've been in several things," he corrected himself. "I was in the drug business, and then I was in the oil business, but I'm not in either one now." He looked at me with more attention. "Do you mean you've been thinking over what I proposed the other night?" Before I could answer, Daisy came out of the house, and 2 rows of brass buttons on her dress gleamed in the sunlight. "That huge place there?" she cried, pointing. "Do you like it?" "I love it. But I don't see how you live there all alone." "I keep it always full of interesting people, night and day, people who do interesting things, celebrated people." Instead of taking a shortcut along the Sound, we went down the road and entered by the big postern. With enchanting murmurs, Daisy admired this aspect. So remember that when somebody is murmuring, you can hear them talking, but maybe you can't really understand the words. And if you think about the 3 of them walking together, probably Gatsby and Daisy are walking together closely, and maybe Nick is a little bit behind them, and maybe they're talking very softly, so he can just hear the talking. Maybe he can just hear the tone. "Ooh, what a beautiful house." He doesn't really hear the words, but he could maybe imagine the words. That's why we're using murmur. With enchanting murmurs. So it's just the sound. He doesn't really hear the words. Daisy admired this aspect of the feudal silhouette against the sky. Admired the gardens, the sparkling odor of jonquils and frothy odor of hawthorn and plum blossoms, and pale gold odor of kiss me at the gate. It was strange to reach the marble steps and find no stir of bright dresses in and out of the door, and hear no sound but bird voices in the trees. Stirring is just moving. So it's strange. He's been to the house before, but there's always been a party and people everywhere, and it was strange to be there when it was quiet, and all you could hear were the birds, and nothing was stirring, nothing was moving. And inside he wandered through the Marie Antoinette music rooms and restoration salons. I felt that there were guests concealed behind every couch and table, under orders to be breathlessly silent until we had passed through. As Gatsby closed the door of the Merton College library, I could have sworn I heard the owl-eyed man break into ghostly laughter. We went upstairs, through period bedrooms swathed in rose and lavender silk and vivid new flowers, through dressing rooms and pool rooms and bathrooms and sunken baths, intruding into one chamber where a disheveled man in pajamas was doing liver exercises on the floor. So I remember the last time we talked about that word disheveled, which I think is a pretty cool word for you to know. And that means looking messy, looking disorganized, not looking your best. Usually you look disheveled in the morning when you wake up. So here are some disheveled people. Disheveled hair. Usually when you talk about disheveled, you're talking about clothes or hair. Because these people need to fix their hair. Or their clothes. It looks messy. It doesn't look nice. It doesn't look neat. Disheveled. So because they're passing through the bedrooms, and one room is a disheveled man, which to me sounds like he just woke up. He was sleeping and then he woke up and now he's doing some morning exercises. Of course, I think it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So if this man just woke up, that's pretty crazy. Fari Boris says bed hair. But actually, you know, they usually say bed head because it rhymes. It sounds better. Bed head. So you say, I have bed head. It was Mr. Klipspringer, the boarder. So remember, boarding means, it kind of means like a guest who you feed. So, for example, there used to be, I don't think that this exists very much anymore, but there used to be something called a boarding house where you could rent a room in a house and they would feed you. So you rented a bedroom, but also you would join the family for meals. Or maybe it was a family, or maybe it was a business. But it's kind of run like a house, like a family, where somebody is always making breakfast or lunch or dinner. So you rent a room, and in that sense, it's like a hotel. But also they include the food. So you can see signs that say room and board. You'll still see that. Actually, let's take a look at a picture of that. Or if you go away to school, like to a university, sometimes they'll talk about room and boarding, which means, oh no, because room and board is the name of a store, they only show pictures of the store. They don't say, well, let's see if we do sign. So especially if you're traveling through a small town, it's still possible to see something like this. And that would mean you can rent a room from us, but we also feed you. We also give you food. And somebody who lives in a place like that is called a boarder. Usually they pay money, but here, wait, let's see how it was used here. It was Mr. Klipspringer the boarder. He's calling him a boarder because Mr. Klipspringer seems to live there. He's like a permanent guest. He's obviously not paying money, but he seems to be staying there on a permanent basis. And you know, probably Gatsby feeds him as well. Now, N is asking about the word swathe or swath. Let's check the definition. And also the pronunciation. Let's see. Swath.
Swath.
Swath. What does it mean? I know people use it meaning huge swath. That's usually how it's used. Huge swath of something. It means like a big group of something. Or let's see. Swathed. Well, this could mean like wrapped, but how was it used here? Oh, here it is used like wrap. The way I'm thinking of it is maybe something different that's not even shown here, which makes me have questions. But this means wrapped. So a normal bedroom is just a bed and a dresser, But these bedrooms are decorated. They're swathed in silk. In silk and lavender silk and pink silk. So you can imagine everything is wrapped in silk, in pink and lavender silk. I had seen him wandering hungrily about the beach that morning. Finally, we came to Gatsby's own apartment. A bedroom and a bath and an Adam's study, where we sat down and drank a glass of some chartreuse he took from the cupboard in the wall. He hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy and I, and I think that he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. So he has this big house filled with beautiful things, amazing things, and as he's giving Daisy a tour of his house, he's changing the value of it in his head according to her opinion of it. So if she says, "Oh, what a beautiful piano," suddenly he loves it more than he ever did before. But if she says, "I don't like that sofa," suddenly it goes down in value because of her opinion. He hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revalued everything in the house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. Sometimes, too, he stared around at his possessions in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence, none of it was any longer real. I'm going blurry. Okay. Once, he nearly toppled a flight of stairs. His bedroom was the simplest room of all, except where the dresser was garnished. Garnished means decorated. With a toilet set of pure, dull gold. Daisy took the brush with delight and smoothed her hair, whereupon Gatsby sat down and shaded his eyes and began to laugh. "It's the funniest thing, old sport," he said hilariously. "I can't when I try to." He had passed visibly through 2 states and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment and his unreasoning joy, he was consumed with wonder at her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed of it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at the inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwound clock. Recovering himself in a minute, he opened for us 2 hulking patent cabinets, which held his massed suits and dressing gowns and ties and his shirts, piled like bricks on stacks, in stacks, a dozen high. "I've got a man in England who buys me clothes. He sends me over a selection of things at the beginning of each season, spring or fall." He took out a pile of shirts and began throwing them by one before us. Shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell, and covered the table in a many-colored disarray. While we admired, he brought more, and the soft, rich heap mounted higher. Shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange with monograms of Indian blue. Suddenly, with a strained voice, Daisy bent her head into the shirts and began to cry stormily. After the house, "They're such beautiful shirts," she sobbed, her voice muffled. If something is muffled, that means you can't understand it because something is covering your mouth. So, for example, when everybody was wearing face masks, maybe they sounded a little bit muffled. This is muffling. It's when something is covering your mouth and you can't understand. So she's got her face in these shirts. They're so beautiful. She's saying it in a muffled way because her mouth is covered. They're such beautiful shirts. Her voice muffled in the thick folds. It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before. After the house, we were to see the grounds and the swimming pool and the hydroplane and the midsummer flowers, but outside Gatsby's window it began to rain again, so we stood in a row looking at the corrugated surface of the Sound. If it wasn't for the mist, we could see your home across the bay, said Gatsby. You always have a green light that burns all night at the end of your dock. Daisy put her arm through his abruptly, but he seemed absorbed in what he had just said. Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. Compared to the great distance that had separated him from Daisy, it had seemed very near to her, almost touching her. It had seemed as close as a star to the moon. Now it was again a green light on the dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by one. I began to talk about the room, examining various indefinite objects in the half-darkness. A large photograph of an elderly man in a yachting costume attracted me, hung on the wall over his desk. Who's this? That's Mr. Dan Cody, old sport. The name sounded faintly familiar. He's dead now. He used to be my best friend years ago. There was a small picture of Gatsby, also in a yachting costume, on the bureau. Gatsby, with his head thrown back defiantly, taken apparently when he was about 18. I'm losing my voice. We're only halfway through. I hope I can make it. I adore it, exclaimed Daisy. The pompadour. You never told me you had a pompadour or a yacht. I think pompadour refers to hair that goes like this. Let's just make sure about that. I'm pretty sure. So that was his hairstyle. And she's saying, I didn't know you wore your hair like that. Yeah. This is an exaggeration. But something like this. I'm sure his hair didn't look like that, but maybe just kind of almost, I've almost got a pompadour. Got to make it a little bit higher, I think, for it to be a pompadour. I adore it, exclaimed Daisy. The pompadour. You never told me you had a pompadour or a yacht. Look at this, said Gatsby quickly. Here's a lot of clippings about you. They stood side by side, examining it. I was going to ask to see the rubies when the phone rang and Gatsby took up the receiver. Yes? Well, I can't talk now. Old sport. I said a small town. He must know what a small town is. Well, he's no use to us if Detroit is his idea of a small town. He rang off. Come here, quick, cried Daisy at the window. The rain was still falling, but the darkness had parted in the west, and there was a pink and golden billow of foamy clouds above the sea. Look at that, she whispered, and then after a moment, I'd like to just get one of those pink clouds and put you in it and push you around. I tried to go then, but they wouldn't hear of it. Perhaps my presence made them feel more satisfactorily alone. I know what we'll do, said Gatsby. We'll have Klipspringer play the piano. We went out of the room calling, Ewing! And returned a few minutes accompanied by an embarrassed, slightly worn young man who with shell-rimmed glasses and scanty blonde hair. Scanty means not very much, so he must be losing his hair. Sneakers and duck trousers of a nebulous hue. "Did we interrupt your exercises?" inquired Daisy politely. "I was asleep," cried Klipspringer, I can't say that guy's name, Klipspringer, in a spasm of embarrassment. "That is, I'd been asleep, then I got up." "Klipspringer plays the piano," said Gatsby, cutting him off. "Don't you, Ewing, old sport?" "I don't play well. I don't. I hardly play at all. I'm all out of Well, go downstairs," interrupted Gatsby. He flipped a switch. The gray windows disappeared as the house glowed full of light. In the music room, Gatsby turned on a solitary lamp beside the piano. He lit Daisy's cigarette from a trembling match and sat down with her on a couch far across the room where there was no light save what the gleaming floor bounced in from the hall. So Gatsby is always sitting in the dark, always in the shadows. He doesn't like to be out in the open for some reason. When Klipspringer had played the Love Nest, he turned around on the bench and searched unhappily for Gatsby in the gloom. "I'm all out of practice, you see. I told you I couldn't play. I'm all out of—" "Don't talk so much, old sport," commanded Gatsby. "Play." And there's a song. "In the morning, in the evening, ain't we got fun?" Outside the wind was loud, and there was a faint flow of thunder along the sound. All the lights were going on all the lights were going on in West Egg now. The electric trains, men carrying, were plunging home through the rain from New York. It was a half hour of a profound human change, and excitement was generating on the air. On the thing sure and nothing one thing sure and nothing sure, the rich get rich and the poor get children in the meantime, in between time, ain't we got fun? That's a real song. Okay, as I don't know the words, I just remember it. Okay, as I went over to say goodbye, I saw the expression of bewilderment. Bewilderment is like confusion. Had come back into Gatsby's face, as though a faint doubt had occurred to him as to the quality of his present happiness. Almost 5 years. There must have been moments even that afternoon when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams. Not through her own fault, but because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. It had gone beyond her, beyond everything. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather, and drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. So Gatsby's been fantasizing about meeting her again, and he's made this enormous fantasy that she can't possibly, if you compare his fantasy to the reality, she can't possibly ever meet his expectations. So during that afternoon, Nick noticed some kind of disappointment in all of this from Gatsby. And the reason is Nick thinks because he built up a huge fantasy about her that could never possibly happen. As I watched him, he adjusted himself a little. Visibly, his hand took hold of hers, and as he said something low in his ear, he turned toward her with a rush of emotion. I think the voice held him most with its fluctuating, feverish warmth, because it couldn't be overdreamed. That voice was a deathless song. They had forgotten me. But Daisy glanced up and held out her hand. Gatsby didn't know me now at all. I looked once more at them, and they looked back at me, remotely possessed by intense life. Then I went out of the room and down the marble steps and into the rain, leaving them there together. Okay, well that's chapter 5. Now we're going to read chapter 6, as promised. But first I have to take a break, so I will be back in 1 minute. All right. Thank you for waiting. Let's start with chapter 6. About this time, an ambitious young reporter from New York arrived one morning at Gatsby's door and asked him if he had anything to say. "Anything to say about what?" inquired Gatsby politely. "Why, any statement to give out." And give out. A lot of times, phrasal verbs can be very hard to learn, but sometimes you can find little rules that will help you. Not always, but sometimes they can be helpful. And a lot of times, if you have a distribution word like give or send or call, and you put the preposition out after this verb, so give out, send out, call out, the difference is when you use out, it means something that will go to many people. So if you send an email, that's a one-to-one exchange. I send an email to you. But if I send out an email, that means I send one email to many different people. If you call someone, "Hey, how are you doing?" If you call out to someone, you're calling out to everyone. You're making a call to everyone who can hear you. And so to give someone something means I pass one thing to you. But if I give something out, that means I give it to everyone. And that's why the reporter is saying, do you have a statement to give out? Meaning, tell me something that I can tell to everyone. So this is a mystery, because Gatsby's saying, what are you talking about? Give out to who? What is? It transpired after a confused 5 minutes that the man had heard Gatsby's name around his office in connection with which he either wouldn't reveal or didn't fully understand. This was his day off, and with laudable initiative, he had hurried out to see. It was a random shot, and yet the reporter's instinct was right. Gatsby's notoriety spread about by the hundreds who had accepted his hospitality and so became authorities on his past, had increased all summer until he fell just short of being news. Contemporary legends such as the underground pipeline to Canada attached themselves to him. And there was one persistent story that he didn't live in a house at all, but in a boat, and looked like a house, and was moved secretly up and down the Long Island shore. Just why these inventions were a source of satisfaction to James Gatz of North Dakota isn't so easy to say. All right, so there doesn't seem to be any particular story or scandal that Gatsby's involved in, but as a result of these constant parties that he's been having, people coming from all over to party all night and then go home, very important people, powerful people. And since Gatsby doesn't really like to socialize too much with people, it seems like everyone invents strange stories about him, which probably isn't such a big deal, except these are very powerful people. So when they go back to New York and they talk about him, powerful people tell other powerful people strange stories that aren't true. So there are all kinds of strange conspiracies and rumors floating around about Gatsby. And it seems like this reporter just wants to see if he can verify any of them. I don't know, maybe there is actually one particular story he's interested in, but I don't know. Now, N is asking about notoriety. The word maybe you've seen the word notorious, which is a pretty common word. Notorious means famous, but probably in a bad way. Well, let's see. I better check that, because now I can think of some ways where it couldn't be bad, or it might not be bad. Notorious. Yeah, it is bad, because it says unfavorably known. So famous, but famous for bad reasons. So if something is notorious, that means everybody knows about it, but also that's a bad thing. It's not a good thing. Same thing with infamous. Maybe you've heard that word before, infamous. That means famous, but in a bad way. Famous for bad reasons. So notorious and infamous are I guess you could say that they're synonyms, and they're pretty common words. So notoriety means like news or gossip, but bad news or bad gossip. How did they use it here? Let's see. It was a random shot, and yet the reporter's instinct was right. Gatsby's notoriety spread about by hundreds who had accepted his hospitality and so become authorities on his past. So all these guests come to his house. They don't know anything about him, but they gossip about him, and they tell bad stories about him. And when they leave, they go and tell their friends these stories, and then he becomes famous for bad reasons he didn't even do anything. James Gatz. That was really, or at least legally, his name. He had changed it at the age of 17, and a specific movement that witnessed the beginning of his career when he saw Dan Cody's yacht drop anchor over the most insidious flat on Lake Superior. It was James Gatz who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants. But it was already J. Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat, pulled out to the Tuolumne, and informed Cody. That must be the name of the boat. Tuolumne. I don't know what that is. I think that's the name of the yacht. Pulled out to the Tuolumne and informed Cody that a wind might catch him and break him up in half an hour. Oh, that's a pretty weird. I have to read that again. I'm not sure what's happening here. James Gatz. So that's the name of the reporter. James Gatz was really or at least legally his name. He had changed it at the age of 17, at the specific moment that witnessed the beginning of his career, when he saw Dan Cody's yacht drop anchor over the most insidious flat on Lake Superior. So, Jay Gatsby, I don't know, is that the... What is Gatsby's first name? Is that his father or is that him? I'm not even sure. So some rich guy had his yacht in Lake Superior on a flat. I don't know what that means. I'm not familiar with water terminology, but maybe that means where there's some land, like the land is very high in the lake. Let's see. The term flat also confuses beginning. A flat is extended shallow water. Yeah, so maybe his yacht was stuck or trapped on a flat. So Lake Superior, that's almost like an ocean. It's very big. It has giant waves. But maybe the boat somehow got stuck on a flat, a place where the land is very high. So the boat is here. Let's see. So Dan Cody's yacht dropped anchor over the most insidious flat. Insidious means like evil. So a horrible flat, an area, a very bad place to put your boat. Let's say that. It was James Gatz, who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey. Insidious, N is asking about insidious. Insidious, let's get the definition. To me, I would just say it's like evil. But let's see. Uh-oh. My computer is acting weird suddenly. Insidious, something that is unpleasant or dangerous and develops gradually without being noticed. So insidious, the insidious flat, it's something bad that people can't see usually. That's what makes it so horrible, is that you don't notice it. All right, so it was James Gatz who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants, but it was already Jay Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat pulled out to the Tulume. So Jay Gatsby went out in his boat, in his rowboat, to help this Dan Cody guy, and informed Cody that the wind might catch him and break him up in half an hour. So he went out, he's in a sailboat, the Tulume, and he went out to warn him, hey, if you don't move, the wind is going to come and you're going to be in a lot of trouble because it's going to move you into an area that will wreck your boat. I suppose he had the name ready for a long time, even then. His parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as his parents at all. The truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was the son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, meretricious beauty. So he invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent. And this conception, he was faithful to the end. So that's kind of a complicated paragraph. It seems like he doesn't really... His parents aren't what he was hoping they would be. So he sort of invented his own... Instead of embracing where he comes from, he sort of rejects who his parents are, and he sort of wrote his own story in life, starting at an early age, around 17, and he doesn't really think about his parents. Instead, he thinks of this ideal person that he wants to be. and he's ashamed of his parents somehow. I think that's what it's saying. I don't know. It's complicated. For over a year, he had been beating his way along the South Lake shore of Lake Superior as a clam digger and a salmon fisher, or in any other capacity that brought him food and bed. His brown, hardening body lived naturally through the half-fierce, half-lazy work of the bracing days. He knew women early, and since they spoiled him, he became contemptuous of them. Contemptuous means he hates them. Of young virgins because they were ignorant. Oh, so he became contemptuous of them. Of young virgins because they were ignorant. Of others because they were hysterical about things which, in his overwhelming self-absorption, he took for granted. But his heart was in a constant, turbulent riot. The most grotesque and fantastic conceits haunted him in his bed at night. A universe of ineffable gaudiness. There's that word gaudy again. Remember, gaudy means too colorful, too bright. It's supposed to look attractive, but it isn't. And ineffable. Let's look up that word, ineffable. Incapable of being expressed in words. So, ineffable gaudiness. So ugly, I can't even describe it. That's what that means. A universe of ineffable gaudiness spun itself out in his brain while the clock ticked on the washstand and the moon soaked with wet light his tangled clothes upon the floor. Each night he added to the pattern of his fancies until drowsiness closed down upon some vivid scene with an obvious embrace. For a while, these reveries provided an outlet for his imagination. They were a satisfactory hint of the reality of... sorry. I guess I'm reading for too long now. I'm messing up. Okay, focus. They were a satisfactory hint of the unreality of reality, a promise that the rock of the world was founded securely on a fairy's wing. An instinct toward his future glory had led him, some months before, to the small Lutheran college of St. Olaf in southern Minnesota. He stayed there 2 weeks, dismayed at its ferocious indifference to the drums of his destiny, to destiny itself, and despising a janitor's work with which he was to pay his way through. Then he drifted back to Lake Superior and was still searching for something to do on the day that Dan Cody's yacht dropped anchor in the shallows along the shore. Variabor says, "Pretty dog, oh boy." Well, I'm sure that that Gizmo appreciates that you called him pretty. He's a very vain dog. Vanity means that you admire yourself. So he's a very vain dog. He likes it when people tell him what a cute dog he is. Cody was 50 years old then, a product of Nevada's silver fields of the Yukon, of every rush for metal since '75. Transactions in Montana copper that made him many times a millionaire found him physically robust. That means he was fat. But on the verge of soft-mindedness, and suspecting this, an infinite number of women tried to separate him from his money. I think this must be Gatsby's father they're describing. I can't remember Gatsby's first name. They're talking about J. Gatsby, but it sounds like they're talking about the 1880s or 1890s. So this must be his father that they're talking about. Maybe they're explaining how his father started making money, or how he became rich. The none too savory ramifications by which Ella Kay, the newspaper woman, played Madame de maintenant to his weakness and sent him to the sea in a yacht were common knowledge to the wait a minute to the turgid journalism of 1902. Yeah, they're talking about his father. What is turgid or turgid? I don't even know how to say that. Let's see. Swollen. Where's the pronunciation? Turgid. Turgid. Okay, so to the turgid journalism of 1902. He had been coasting along all too hospitable shores for 5 years when he turned up as James Gats's destiny at Little Girl Bay. So this rich man, I guess, has his yacht, and Gatsby's father saved him from a disaster one day. And this journalist, Gats, was there at the time when it happened. To the young Gats, resting on his oars and looking up at the railed deck, the yacht represented all the beauty and glamour in the world. I suppose he smiled at Cody. He had probably discovered that people liked him when he smiled. N says, as I read now, James Katz was Gatsby and changed. You know, you're right. I think you're probably right. I didn't catch that. So, I thought that was the name of the journalist who knocked on the door, but that makes sense that his name was Katz and it was changed to Gatsby. That does make sense. Okay, I think I've lost something here, but I'm not going back. So hopefully we can clarify this as we go. To the young Gats, resting on his oars and looking up at the railed deck, the yacht resembled all the beauty and glamour in the world. I suppose he smiled at Cody. He had probably discovered that people liked him when he smiled, at any rate. Cody asked him a few questions. One of them elicited a brand new name, and found that he was quick and extravagantly ambitious. A few days later, he took him to Duluth and bought him a blue coat, 6 pair of white duck trousers, and a yachting cap. And then the Tulume left for the West Indies and the Barbary Coast, and Gatsby left too. Yeah, that makes sense. He was employed in a vague personal capacity. While he remained with Cody, he was in turn steward, mate, skipper, secretary, and even jailer. For Dan Cody, sober, knew what lavish doings Dan Cody, drunk, might soon be about, and he provided for such contingencies by reposing more and more trust in Gatsby. So Dan Cody would sometimes drink a lot, and he knew that if he drank a lot of alcohol, he would be out of control. And so he even gave Gatsby power to lock him in a room if he got too out of control. That's the extent of their relationship. I'm glad you were paying attention, Anne. Now it all makes sense. He was employed in a... Oh, wait, let's not read that again. The arrangement lasted 5 years, during which the boat went 3 times around the continent. It might have lasted indefinitely, except for the fact that Ella Kay came on board one night in Boston, and a week later, Dan Cody inhospitably died. N says he was not rich, I guess, and then he made his name. Yeah, I think that's what happened. So he started from Minnesota, from a farm, and then he decided to come to New York, and he was walking along the beach one day, and he rescued this rich man from a disaster, and they became friends, and Gatsby became his employee, and now this man died. I remembered the portrait of him in Gatsby's bedroom. So remember in the previous chapter, Nick said, "Who's that man?" He said, "Oh, that was my best friend. He's dead now. So that must be the man." I remember the portrait of him in Gatsby's bedroom, a gray, florid man with a hard, empty face, a pioneer debauchee, who during one phase of American life brought back to the eastern seaboard the savage violence of the frontier brothel and saloon. It was indirectly due to Cody that Gatsby drank so little. Sometimes in the course of the gay parties, women used to rub champagne in his hair. For himself, he formed the habit of letting liquor alone. So this man they call him a debauchee, which is, I guess, a French word. We don't use that. You wouldn't call that to someone now. But there is the word debauchery, which means drinking, having sex, gambling, doing everything bad. That's debauchery. So if he's a debauchee, that means that's not a word that you would use in modern English. But that would mean he's somebody who does that. And it seems like he made a lot of money in the West, in the American West. So around that time, the 1870s, 1880s, that's called the Wild West. Like if you see the cowboy movies, there's no law, and everything's about drinking and gambling and doing whatever you want. It was a crazy, crazy period. And you still sometimes use that phrase, the Wild West, to mean a period of no law, no rules. So you could say the late 90s, early 2000s was the Wild West of the internet. Because there weren't any rules. You could do whatever you wanted on the internet. And now everything is watched and censored. And it was from Cody that he inherited money, a legacy of $25,000. He didn't get it. He never understood he didn't get it. Okay, that means not that he didn't get the money. It means he didn't understand it. He didn't get it. He didn't understand it. He never understood the legal device that was used against... Oh, no, it really means he didn't get the money. He never received the money. He never understood the legal device that was used against him. But what remained of the millions went intact to Ella Kay. He was left with his singularly appropriate education. The vague contour of J. Gatsby had filled out to the substantiality of a man. He told me all of this very much later, but I put it down here with the idea of exploding those first wild rumors about his antecedents. His antecedents meaning the people that came before him, his parents or grandparents, which weren't even faintly true. Moreover, he told it to me at a time of confusion, when I had reached the point of believing everything and nothing about him. So I take advantage of this short halt, while Gatsby, so to speak, caught his breath, to clear this set of misconceptions away. It was a halt, too, in my association with his affairs. For several weeks, I didn't see him or hear his voice on the phone. Mostly, I was in New York, trotting around with Jordan and trying to ingratiate myself with her senile aunt. But finally, I went over to his house one day, Sunday afternoon. I hadn't been there 2 minutes when somebody brought Tom Buchanan in for a drink. I was startled. Naturally, because Tom Buchanan is Daisy's husband, and he's not a very nice person. And Gatsby and Buchanan know about each other in some way. At least Buchanan knows... Well, yeah, they both know that Daisy had a relationship in the past before she got married to Tom. So that's why it's very surprising to see him at Gatsby's house. They were a party of 3 on horseback, Tom and a man named Sloane, and a pretty woman in brown riding habit who had been there previously. I'm delighted to see you, said Gatsby, standing on his porch. I'm delighted that you dropped in. As though they cared. Sit right down, have a cigarette or a cigar. He walked around the room quickly, ringing bells. I'll have something to drink for you in just a minute. He was profoundly affected by the fact that Tom was there, but he would be uneasy anyhow until he had given them something, realizing in a vague way that was all they came for. Mr. Sloane wanted nothing. A lemonade? No thanks. A little champagne? Nothing at all, thanks. I'm sorry. Did you have a nice ride? Very good roads around here. I suppose the automobiles... Yeah. Moved by an irresistible impulse, Gatsby turned to Tom, who had accepted the introduction as a stranger. I believe we met somewhere before, Mr. Buchanan. Oh, yes, said Tom, gruffy, polite, but obviously not remembering. So we did. I remember you very well. About 2 weeks ago. That's right. You were with Nick here. I know your wife, continued Gatsby almost aggressively. That's so. Tom turned to me. You live near here, Nick? Next door. That's so. Mr. Sloane. You know, when you say, is that so, that's just a way, it's like a comment that you make. Like, oh, really? It's a similar kind of thing, in case you didn't know. So it's, is that so? Is that so? But here, he's just saying, that's so. That's like, oh, really? Mr. Sloane didn't enter into the conversation, but lounged back haughtily in his chair. The woman said nothing either, until unexpectedly, after 2 highballs, that's a type of drink, she became cordial. So after she had two glasses of some kind of strong drink, she suddenly became friendly. We'll all come over to your next party, Mr. Gatsby, she suggested. What do you say? Certainly. I'd be delighted to have you. I don't know why it says it like that. Be very nice. I don't know why it's like that. But very nice, said Mr. Sloane without gratitude. Well, think ought to be starting home. Oh. I think he's saying it will be very nice. But maybe he's a little drunk or something. But very nice. Something like that. Well, think... He's not speaking in full phrases or sentences. Think ought to be starting home. So he's saying we have to leave now. Please don't hurry, Gatsby urged them. He had control over himself now, and he wanted to see more of Tom. Why don't you stay for supper? I wouldn't be surprised if some other people dropped in from New York. And says maybe he's drunk. I think so. I think he might be kind of drunk. So he's not speaking in full or intelligible sentences. Intelligible means you can understand. And he's unintelligible, which means I can't understand what he's saying. You come to supper with me, said the lady enthusiastically. Both of you. This included me. Mr. Sloane got to his feet. Come along, he said, but to her only. I mean it, she insisted. I'd love to have you. Lots of room. Gatsby looked at me questioningly. Huh? He wanted to go, and he didn't see that Mr. Sloane had determined he shouldn't. I'm afraid I won't be able to, I said. Well, you come, she urged, concentrating on Gatsby. Mr. Sloane murmured something close to her ear. We won't be late if we start now, she insisted aloud. I haven't got a horse, said Gatsby. I used to ride in the army, but I never bought a horse. I'll have to follow you in my car. Excuse me for just a minute. The rest of us walked onto the porch, where Sloane and the lady began an impassioned conversation aside. My God, I believe the man's coming, said Tom. Doesn't he know she doesn't want him? She says she does want him. She has a big dinner party and he won't know a soul there. He frowned. I wonder where in the devil he met Daisy, by God. I may be old-fashioned in my ideas, but women run around too much these days to suit me. They meet all kinds of crazy fish. So she invited Gatsby to her house for dinner? Suddenly, Mr. Sloane and the lady walked down the steps and mounted their horses. Come on, said Mr. Sloane to Tom. We're late. We've got to go. And then to me, tell him we couldn't wait. Will you? Tom and I shook hands, and the rest of us exchanged a cool nod, and then trotted quickly down the drive, disappearing under the August foliage. Just as Gatsby, with hat and light overcoat in hand, came out the front door. So they invited him to dinner, and then they left without him, which is kind of rude, I think. Tom was evidently perturbed at Daisy's running around alone, for perturbed means annoyed. So Tom was evidently annoyed at Daisy's running around, perturbed. For on the following Saturday night, he came with her to Gatsby's party. Perhaps his presence gave the evening its peculiar quality of oppressiveness. It stands out in my memory from Gatsby's other parties that summer. They were the same people, or at least the same sort of people, the same profusion of champagne, the same many-colored, many-keyed commotion. But I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. So when something is harsh, it is unpleasantly extreme. So everything seemed very extreme. The music was too loud. The people were laughing too hard. Everything was extreme in a very unpleasant way. And that's why he says, I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. Everything seems extreme, too loud, too colorful, too extreme. Pervade, N is asking about pervade. That means everywhere. It's everywhere. So, pervading harshness everywhere. Everything seemed extreme. People were too drunk. The music was too loud. People were laughing too loudly or in too high of a tone. Everything was annoying him. And it wasn't like that before. Something changed. Now I want to check the word pervade, just to make sure I'm right. Yeah, you can see it through every part. You can see it, smell it, taste it everywhere. Or perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Ag as its own, as a world in itself, with its own standards, its own great figures, second to nothing because it had no consciousness of being so. And now I was looking at it again through Daisy's eyes. It is invariably saddening to look through it, to look through new eyes at things upon which you have expended your own powers of adjustment. They arrived at twilight, and as we strolled out among the sparkling hundreds, Daisy's voice was playing murmurous tricks in her throat. "These things excite me so," she whispered. "If you want to kiss me at any time during the evening, Nick, just let me know and I'll be glad to arrange it for you. Just mention my name or present a green card. I'm giving out green." "Look around," suggested Gatsby. "I'm looking around. I'm having a marvelous..." "No, you must see the faces of many people you've heard about." Tom's arrogant eyes roamed the crowd. "We don't go around very much," he said. "In fact, I was just thinking I don't know a soul here." Perhaps you know that lady, Gatsby indicated, a gorgeous, scarcely human orchid of a woman who sat in state under a white plum tree. To sit in state, that means you're sitting in a very official way, like a queen. So she was sitting like a queen under the tree, under the white plum tree. Tom and Daisy stared with that peculiarly unreal... Now I have to check to sit in state. Sometimes I think they use that for dead people. Or to lie in state. Yeah, a king sitting on his throne. That's what it means. So she looked like a queen sitting very elegantly under the tree. Tom and Daisy stared with that I can never say this word, peculiarly. That's a really hard word to say. Peculiarly. I can't say it quickly. Peculiarly. With that peculiarly unreal feeling that accompanies the recognition of a hitherto ghostly celebrity of the movies. She's lovely, said Daisy. The man bending over her is her director. He took them ceremoniously from group to group. Mrs. Buchanan and Mr. Buchanan. After an instant's hesitation, he added, the polo player. Oh, no, objected Tom quickly. Not me. But evidently, the sound of it pleased Gatsby, for Tom remained the polo player for the rest of the evening. I've never met so many celebrities, Daisy exclaimed. I liked that man. What was his name? With the sort of blue nose. Gatsby identified him, adding he was a small producer. Well, I liked him anyhow. I'd a little rather not be the polo player, said Tom pleasantly. So he's like, stop calling me the polo player. I'd rather look at all these famous people in oblivion. So he's saying maybe he's saying stop introducing me to people. I'd rather be anonymous. I think that's what the oblivion part means here. Daisy and Gatsby danced. I remember being surprised by his graceful, conservative foxtrot. I had never seen him dance before. Then they sauntered over to my house and sat on the steps for half an hour, while at her request I remained watchfully in the garden. In case there's a fire or a flood, she explained, or any act of God. So really she's saying stand in the garden and make sure Tom doesn't come over. Tom appeared from his oblivion as we were sitting down to supper together. Do you mind if I eat with some people over there? He said. A fellow's getting off some funny stuff. Go ahead, answered Daisy genially. And if you want to take down any addresses, here's my little gold pencil. She looked around after a moment and told me the girl was common but pretty. I knew that except for the half hours she'd been alone with Gatsby, she wasn't having a good time. We were at a particularly tipsy table. To be tipsy means to be a little bit drunk. So if you drink a lot of alcohol, you'll be drunk. But if you just drink a little bit of alcohol, you'll be tipsy. We were at a particular... Also, it's a polite way of saying drunk. So sometimes when you say someone's tipsy, it means a little drunk, but sometimes that means a lot drunk. Like, oh, you're a little tipsy today. That's a polite way of saying you're drunk. So we were at a particularly tipsy table. I think what that means here is a polite way of saying everybody at the table was very drunk. That was my fault. Gatsby had been called to the phone, and I'd enjoyed these same people only 2 weeks before. But what had amused me then turned septic in the air now. How do you feel, Miss Bedecker? The girl addressed was trying unsuccessfully to slump against my shoulder. So she's drunk. Ugh, slumping. This is slumping. At this inquiry, she sat up and opened her eyes. Huh? She's really drunk. What? A massive and lethargic woman who had been urging Daisy to play golf with her at a local club tomorrow spoke in Mrs. Bedeker's defense. Oh, she's all right now. When she's had 5 or 6 cocktails, she always starts screaming like that. I'll tell her she ought to leave it alone. I do leave it alone, affirmed the accused hollowly. We heard you yelling, so I said to Doc Civet here, there's somebody that needs your help, Doc. She's much obliged, I'm sure, said another friend without gratitude. But you got her dress all wet when you stuck her head in the pool. So she's so drunk they put her head in the pool to try to shock her, to make her act normal. Anything I hate is to get my head stuck in a pool, mumbled Miss Bedeker. They almost drowned me once over in New Jersey, so this happens a lot to her. Then you ought to leave it alone, countered Dr. Civet. Speak for yourself, cried Miss Bedeker violently. Your hand shakes. I wouldn't let you operate on me. It was like that. Almost the last thing I remembered was standing with Daisy and watching the moving picture director and his star. They were still under the white plum tree, and their faces were touching, except for a pale, thin ray of moonlight between. It occurred to me that he had been very slowly bending over her all evening to attain this proximity. And even while I watched, I saw him stoop one ultimate degree and kiss her cheek. I like her, said Daisy. I think she's lovely. But the rest offended her, and inarguably. Because it wasn't a gesture but an emotion. She was appalled. Appalled means shocked in a very bad way. If you're appalled, you're, oh, that's disgusting. You're shocked, you're angry, you're disgusted. She was appalled by West Egg, this unprecedented place that Broadway had begotten upon a Long Island fishing village, appalled by its raw vigor that chafed under the old euphemisms, and by too obtrusive faith that herded its inhabitants along a shortcut from nothing to nothing. She saw something awful in the very simplicity she failed to understand. I sat on the front steps with them while they waited for their car. It was dark here in front. Only the bright door sent 10 square feet of light volleying up into the soft black morning. Sometimes a shadow moved against a dressing room blind above, gave way to another shadow, an indefinite procession of shadows, who rouged and powdered in an invisible glass. Who is this Gatsby, anyhow? Demanded Tom suddenly. Some big bootlegger? Bootlegger is someone who makes alcohol without a license. So if you go into the back of your house and you set up a fire and a pot and you make alcohol, this is unofficial alcohol. It's illegal to do that in most places. But that's bootleg alcohol. And in the 1920s, alcohol was illegal in the United States. So bootlegging became a very prosperous business. You could make a lot of money bootlegging because people wanted alcohol and it was illegal. So that's why he's saying, who is this Gatsby? Is he some bootlegger? Did he make all of this money making illegal alcohol and selling it? That could be very possible to make that much money at that time. N is asking about rouge. Rouge is the French word for red. And when women wear makeup, some women put some red on their cheeks here. Now, most of the time in English you would call this blush. applying blush, because blushing is when you become embarrassed and your face turns red, a little bit red. That's blushing. So women who wear makeup call that blush, but another way of calling that is rouge. Rouge just means red in French. And so it's very early morning, and you can see the shadows, the silhouettes. Let me show you what a silhouette is. So the party is ending. It's early morning. There's some light. And Nick is standing out in front of the house. And when he looks up at the house, he can see the silhouettes in the rooms. So he's just describing people doing things, rouging and powdering their faces. Silhouettes, shadows, rouging and maybe they're using the reflection in the glass to do that. So when you look up, you see this silhouette of people in some of the rooms rouging their cheeks or powdering their faces. "Who is this Gatsby anyhow?" demanded Tom suddenly. "Some big bootlegger?" "Where'd you hear that?" I inquired. "I didn't hear it. I imagined it. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, you know." "Not Gatsby," I said shortly. He was silent for a moment. The pebbles of the drive crunched under his feet. "Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together." A menagerie is like a collection, another French word. What does menagerie mean, actually? A collection. Actually, a collection of wild animals. A strange collection of diverse people or things. So, what did he say? He certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together, this collection of weird people and weird things. A breeze stirred the gray haze of Daisy's fur collar. "At least they're more interesting than the people we know," she said with an effort. "You didn't look so interested." "Well, I was." Tom laughed and turned to me. "Did you notice Daisy's face when that girl asked her to put her under the cold shower?" So again, these people are getting very drunk, but they're using the polite word tipsy, which means a little bit drunk. And that's something people do when they get very drunk. They try to put cold water in their face to return to life, to return to reality, a shock. So did you see Daisy's face when that girl asked her to put her under the cold shower? So Daisy isn't used to people getting this drunk, where they say, "Oh, can you put some cold water on me, please?" And Daisy's like, "What is going on here? This is crazy. These people are crazy." Daisy began to sing with the music in a husky, rhythmic whisper, bringing out a meaning in each word that it had never had before and would never have again. When the melody rose, her voice broke up sweetly following it, in a way contralto voices have, and each change tipped out a little of her warm human magic upon the air. "Lots of people come who haven't been invited," she said suddenly. "That girl hadn't been invited. They simply forced their way in, and he's too polite to object." "I'd like to know who he and what he does," insisted Tom, "and I think I'll make a point of finding out." "I can tell you right now," she answered. "He owns some drugstores, a lot of drugstores. He built them up himself." The dilatory limousine came rolling up the drive. "Good night, Nick," said Daisy. He glanced left and sought the lighted top of the steps, where 3 o'clock in the morning a neat, sad little waltz of that year was drifting out into the open door, After all, in the very casualness of Gatsby's party, there were romantic possibilities totally absent from her world. What was it up there in the song that seemed to be calling her back inside? What would happen now in the dim, incalculable hours? Perhaps some unbelievable guest would arrive, a person infinitely rare to be marveled at. To marvel is to say, oh, wow. So some celebrity to be marveled at. They'll produce some famous person and everybody will say, wow. They'll marvel at him. Some authentically radiant young girl who, with one fresh glance at Gatsby, one moment of magical encounter, would blot out those 5 years of unwavering devotion. I stayed late that night. Gatsby asked me to wait until he was free, and I lingered. To linger somewhere is to stay somewhere even when you should be leaving. So when you linger, that means you're staying, but you should be leaving. I lingered in the garden until the inevitable swimming party had run up. Chilled and exalted from the black beach, until the lights were extinguished and the guest rooms overheard. Anne is saying Gatsby is angry that Daisy got married because she thought he was poor and now trying some way to show off. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure if that's what happened. I guess we'll find out pretty soon, because there are only about 60 pages left. So I think we have to find out what happened before then. I lingered in the garden until the inevitable swimming party had run up, chilled and exalted from the black beach until the lights were extinguished and the guest rooms overheard. When he came down the steps at last, the tanned skin was drawn unusually tight on his face, and his eyes were bright and tired. She didn't like it, he said immediately. Of course she did. And she didn't like it, he insisted. She didn't have a good time. He was silent, and I guessed at his unutterable depression. I feel far away from her, he said. It's hard to make her understand. You mean about the dance? The dance? He dismissed all of the dances he had given with a snap of his fingers. Old sport, the dance is unimportant. N says, I haven't read that book. I haven't read it either. I haven't seen the movies. I remember they made this a movie in the 1970s, in the mid-70s. And I guess it was a very big, important movie. But I think I saw 1 or 2 scenes from the movie, and I was very young. I was a child, so I thought it was boring. And then I guess Leonardo DiCaprio made another version of it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. But I didn't see that either. So I have really no idea what's going on in this book. To utter something, N is asking about the word unutterable. To utter something means to make words. So when you utter something, you're sounding words. You're making words with your mouth. So if something is unutterable, it means you can't put it into words. You can't say it. Unspeakable is kind of, except unspeakable means it's horrible. It's so horrible I can't say. Unspeakable cruelty. But unutterable just means it's not possible to say it for some reason. Where was that? Unutterable. He was silent, and I guessed at his unutterable depression. So he's feeling this horrible sadness. She didn't like it. But he can't express how sad he is. He can't put into words how depressed he is. His unutterable depression. He can't put it into words. He wanted nothing less of Daisy than he should go to Tom and say, "I never loved you." After she had obliterated 3 years with that sentence, they could decide upon a more practical measure to be taken. One of them was that, after she was free, they were to go back to Louisville to be married from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago. See, I think he's had money longer for 5 years. So this broken engagement happened only 5 years ago. But it seems like he's had money most of his life, I think. I don't know. Let's see. And she doesn't understand, he said. She used to be... And plus he went to Oxford. Well, he says he went to Oxford, and he has pictures of himself at Oxford, so he must have been very rich when he was younger and influential. And she doesn't understand, he said. She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours. He broke off and began to walk up and down the desolate path of fruit rinds and discarded favors and crushed flowers. "I wouldn't ask too much of her," I ventured. "You can't repeat the past." "Can't repeat the past?" he cried incredulously. "Why, of course you can." He looked around him wildly, as if the past were lurking here in the shadow. Lurking is kind of like hiding. Just out of reach of his hand. "I'm going to fix everything, just as it was before," he said, nodding determinedly. "She'll see." He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he had wanted to recover some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then, but if he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it again all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. One autumn night, 5 years before, they had been walking down the street when the leaves were falling, and they came to a place where there were no trees, and the sidewalk was white with moonlight. They stopped here and turned toward each other. Now it was a cool night with the mysterious excitement in it which comes at 2 changes of the year. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir or bustle among the stars. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalk really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb to it if he climbed alone, and once there, he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. His heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own, and he knew that when he kissed this girl, and forever wed this unutterable visions of her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star, and then he kissed her. And at his lips' touch, she blossomed from him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. Through all, he said, even though his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth, and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there were more struggling upon them than a wisp of startled air. Oh, this is really complicated. But they made no sound, and I had almost remembered what was uncommunicable forever. Oh my, okay. Well, that's just a pretty way of saying he kissed her. He remembers the first time he kissed her 5 years ago. Let's just say that, because it's pretty complicated. All right, well, that was the end of chapter 6. So next time, tomorrow, same time tomorrow, I will be reading chapter 7. So thank you everyone who came and listened today. And I hope you come back tomorrow when we read chapter 7. And thank you for all of your questions and comments, and I will see you later. Goodbye.